What we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the key predictions, some of the key themes that we're seeing emerging in the 2025. Now, these will not be the only themes, but these are ones, as I'll explain as we go through the session, are coming out some of the main research reports. Learning transformation doesn't begin with doing, it begins with mindset. We're then going to look at 4 key shifts, which I'm going to unpack with you, and then I'm going to set us up for the rest of the forum, for the rest of the 2 days, in terms of really thinking through and applying what we're hearing in terms of the case studies and the panels, in terms of how they work in our own context. So first of all, I want to talk about mindset. Often, if we think about transformation and we think about how we're driving a change agenda, we think about doing, we think about actual activities. And I want to just kind of step back from that and say the most transformational practice that I've experienced normally begins with a mindset change. And that goes back to my time. I actually was in prison for 5 years. So I hasten to add, it wasn't because I did any heinous crime, but I was head of HR and learning for one of the big substance rehabilitation charities in the UK, which meant I spent an awful lot of time in prison. And what was really interesting there is we saw people with profound challenges in life seeing transformation, but it became obvious to me that that was through a mindset change, not through any program or particular activity. So in terms of we think about transformation, I just want to throw out a new theory to you, or a theory that many of you might not have come across. We often think of Kotter's 8 stages of change transformation. But I want to show you, I've got a slide here which is based on an iceberg, which is a theory called theoretical change, which is by some guys called Prochaska and Di Clemente, which is what we used in rehab. Now, what's really profound about this one is that a lot of the work which underpins our transformation, and this applies, I believe, in learning as well, is about thinking ahead of the game. And what the model shows us, it starts with pre-contemplation, which is actually saying, what's the risk if I stay as I am? And that's a very good question for us as learning practitioners right now, to think about if we don't change, to pre-contemplate what that might look like. So it is about raising awareness. The model then goes on to talk about contemplation, which is really at the heart of reflective practice. And it's thinking about what would it be like if I reframed my practice, if I thought about doing this differently. And that's certainly how we worked in rehab, to enable people to reframe their thinking and to think about a more positive future or a more exciting future and what that would be. And then you move on to preparation, which is still under the waterline in terms of our iceberg, in terms of making some early thinking and plans. And it's only then that we get into action. So I want to encourage you, you're going to hear some fantastic things in the forum over the 2 days. I want you to really challenge your thinking. Don't just dip to solutions too early, but really think about what this means for you. And we're going to use a reflective practice model, which comes from John Driscoll, which you may have come across, which is what, so what, now what. So this is about how do you structure your reflective thinking. So the what for us during the forum will be the case studies, the presentations. We'll present some things around what might this look like. But we really encourage you to ask the question, so what does this mean for in my context? And now what am I going to do about this? And we encourage you to use the forums, to use the chat, to send some feedback to us around how this is landing for you. And we need to recognise collaboration is really, really important. There's a famous poem by John Donne which says, no man or woman is an island. So your collaboration during this event is really important through the Mentimeter activities and through the chat as we work together to think about how we can land our new practice. So on to 4 trends. We're going to look at 4 key things. And I want to say these are not the only ones, but these are some significant ones which we've been tracking, not only through VPS's study, but also looking at studies by CIPD. We've looked at World Economic Forum, some of the study around future jobs. We've looked at LinkedIn Learning, McKinsey, and also Brandon Hall as well. So this is a kind of, what I've done is I've merged these together and tried to pick 4 key things which we can see are trending now, which we need to think about in terms of our own practice. And these are, we're going to look at skills-based development, moving away from perhaps a role-based approach to learning to skills. We're going to think about performance impact and looking at value as opposed to volume. And that did come up in the first session, that we really need to think about value adding. We're going to think a little bit around emerging technologies and moving not on necessarily from established technologies, but how do we embrace the concept of new technologies? And then lastly, we're going to look a little bit about moving away from generic programs to personalization. So here we go. The first area, the first shift I want to encourage you and I to think about as we head into 2025 is to think about skills-based development. Now, there are some frightening statistics around what we're calling a black hole of skills development. Globally, 70% of chief executives recognize there is a major gap in terms of the skills that they need in their organizations to be successful. So there is a major problem brewing in the boardroom, which is coming down to us as part of the solution as learning professionals to support how we now develop these key skills. In the UK, this equates to around about £22 billion in lost productivity. And again, in terms of the global skills impact, it's over $8.5 trillion. So I want you, first of all, just to grasp that this is really important and has a huge impact on the well-being and the future of organizations. Now, typically how we've addressed skills in the past is very much this kind of siloed approach. I think back to my learning career, and often it was about developing teams or developing specific roles, or maybe we had specific programs like induction or compliance. And what we've done is we've built these almost kind of vertical silos of solutions. What a skills-based approach does is cuts right across that. So we begin to think about what are the essential skills which are absolutely crucial for everybody. Now, understandably, that might be at different levels or different tiers, but we're thinking about the common skills which we need to implement in the organization. And there is incredibly compelling evidence as to why we may want to go to a skills approach. So why focus on skills development? There is no doubt this boosts productivity. So the kind of golden theme in many organizations is now, how can we be more performance related? How can we be more productive? Well, a skills-based approach, cross-cutting skills, is a key way of doing that. And what's really interesting, in terms of if you want to look at how the impact on performance is, skills is 5 times more effective as an approach as leaning on someone's work experience. And it's also twice as more effective in terms of judging performance than just looking at qualifications. Now, hear me right, I'm really passionate about qualifications and those kind of things, but there is no doubt that skills now are really related to performance in terms of even things like customer service, customer fulfillment. And also, if we're looking at getting candidates for the long term who might really impact the organization, then recruiting for skills is really important. And also, it's absolutely vital for the employee value proposition. But over 90% see essential skills as crucial for their own career. And it can actually lead to an annual wage premium of around 10% extra. So if now you and I and our learners are highly skilled, it's actually going to have a huge potential impact. And many people, just listen to this statistic here, 56% said they would actually change jobs in order to get better access to skills training. So it's really important. Now, what are the essential skills? I guess that's the kind of question on my lips and probably the one you're asking. So what I've done is I've done some heavy lifting for us and looked at World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, which many of you will have seen, but also looked at McKinsey, LinkedIn, also work around future skills, some work that Bernard Marr has done. And these are some of the common cross-cutting skills that we're looking at. And if we have a look at the slide here, we'll call out some of the ones which you'll be able to see here. These are the kind of things that organizations are looking. So things like agility, active listening, curiosity. We often talk about the need for us to be curious. Ethics is interesting as well. So these are some of the common skills which are coming out across these reports, which we may want to think about implementing in our circumstances. So here's the first Mentimeter word cloud, which we're going to do. I want you to focus in on yourself, or if you're in a learning and development team, I want you to think about your team. And just to add, what key skill or skills, you can put a couple in there if you want to, are you focusing on personally developing or your team developing for you this year? So this is not about your learners or your staff. This is actually about yourself and what you want to develop yourself. So let's have a look. You can now access that through the QR code. Your interaction really makes these events really engaging and important for us. Your voice is really crucial. So whilst we're here in the studio presenting to you, you have an opportunity here to engage with the rest of the group and add your thinking to the mix. So if I think for myself right now, I'm really looking at performance consulting as a key skill for me. How do I develop consultancy skills? Sure, I'm running my own consultancy now, but it's really important for me to think about how does that dialogue and consultation go. So I don't know if we can publish what we've got in so far in terms of, let's have a look on the screen. What have we got in terms of so far? Okay, so this is really good. So virtual classroom, yeah, that's a really powerful one. Most of us got slightly caught out by COVID in terms of our virtual classroom delivery, but it's still a really important one for us to develop those skills around how do we not only design but deliver great virtual training. Resilience, I really like that, whoever's put that one in. Resilience and innovation, and those things definitely go together. But in terms of the demands on us as learning professionals, building our own resilience is really important. Strategic thinking, strategic planning, excellent. So the whole thing about strategy and understanding strategy and how to interpret that is really important. Then we've got some of the techie ones coming through as well. Critical thinking, let's just call that one out. What a great call out from someone there, that if we're going to be really effective in terms of our learning solutions, we really need to have that critical thinking where we're understanding not only what is the right solution, but how is it going to impact the business. So we'll capture these word clouds for you, but thanks for those of you who have input there. Maybe what you'll find as you look at this word cloud, there might be some things that some of your peers have dropped in there, which you think, actually, that is a really, really good call in terms of my own skills development. So that's really, really helpful. So thank you for that. So just a few top tips before we move on to the second trend. This is some of the things in doing the research I found will help you and I in terms of developing our skills-based approach. First is we need to do skills audits, and I'll come on to AI in a moment, but it's really important that we understand what skills our organisation need, but also how we can audit and assess how those skills sit with staff and what we need to develop. And also it's really important we think about creative learning pathways which allow people to put these skills together in a way that really appeals to them. So this is not, again, about the silos, the default approach. If we're thinking about critical thinking, let's think about how we can create a whole range of resources which support people to access those skills. Another quick tip here as well is thinking about how you move learning into the moment of need and the flow of work. And yeah, okay, I'll put my book up here. I was really shocked when this book won a Business Book Award, which was just amazing for me. But the reason I think it did was because it has been quite a struggle for us to think about how do we get learning in the moment of need. 94% of leaders now expect their staff to upskill on the job. So we need to get really smart about thinking about solutions which can be accessed in the moment. A little bit about artificial intelligence. Not going to go into huge detail, but I'm just going to drop some thinking in around how AI may help us. So we can actually do real-time skills analysis rather than working on old spreadsheets. We can actually tag staff, not physically, but we can tag staff with particular skills. So if we're building a cross-project team, we can use AI to see who might be best placed to do that. We can think about content pathways as well and matching learners and experts. So AI can begin to do that matching exercise to build those skills. Now, one freebie for me, I've done some heavy lifting for you. I went across 6 key skills reports, and I found, I only got it down to 75, but I found 75 skills that you may want to consider in your organisation, and you can download this free of charge. It just gives you a chance to look at this without having to read all the reports. So 75 skills which you can pick from, and we'll make that available to you. Now, the second thing we're going to look at is we're going to think about moving from volume to value for performance impact. And there were some really helpful comments in that first session. Michael made some really important comments around thinking about when we think of impact, it's not just about over a long period of time, but it's those moments where we can capture very specifically how impact is being generated. And it's time to have a laser focus on performance. Now, I was working with a big client about 2 weeks ago, and we were looking at challenges to learning budgets, and some of you will be experiencing this in your context. It is a tough time for many organisations, and sadly, sometimes training budgets are cut as one of the things when money is tight. If we reframe budgets in terms of not thinking about what is the training budget, but what is the performance budget, then I think it's a much easier opportunity to go to our senior leaders and actually say, we are looking to invest in performance. So for us as learning professionals, this is very much about thinking, how do we now move to a performance-based culture? And I've got a little model here, someone I'm working with currently, Joss Aretz, who incredibly insightful guy. As I said, doing some work with Joss at the minute, and he came up with this really helpful diagram, and you can download the report from the internet, which looks at, and it's one of these 2x2 diagrams, but it looks about how strategic or operational we're being and how much business focused or learning and HR focused we are. And the reality is I spent quite a bit of my learning career in that bottom left-hand corner as an order taker, where I was being asked by the business for solutions. perhaps with very little opportunity to shape the agenda. If you move on that side, in the left-hand side of the diagram, Josh suggests you can move a bit from that to become what he calls a learning enabler, where you are still being asked largely to create solutions, but you do have some say where you're enabling how the learning takes place. What's really exciting for us if we think about performance improvement, if we can get onto that right-hand side of the diagram, we're then beginning to enable performance, which means we are thinking about operational priorities. So performance enablers are looking to be alongside specific teams and individuals to constantly support their improvement. And that's a much bigger agenda for us. It's a very exciting opportunity. And then if we move up to be even more strategic, we can think about value creation, which is where I encourage each of us to be in terms of our delivery. This is about thinking more about solutions rather than formal programs, and thinking about what would actually drive value in a given situation. So this diagram is one where I just encourage you, I think all of us need to be on the right-hand side and as high up as we can in terms of performance value creation. And yet so often in organisations we see a cookie-cutter based approach. Often we're thinking about default programs which look certain ways, and maybe the volume-based approach is it's much cheaper or cost-effective to push out stuff which is all the same. But I think we've got to move much more to a performance consulting approach. It's about diagnosing operational needs. It's almost like a clinical thing. We diagnose what the need is, but we also define what are the contributing factors, because it might not just be skill, it might be motivation, it could be the environment we're in. So we're taking a much more systemic approach around this. Then we also describe, what does this need to look like? What does the future state, if someone was doing this really well, we begin to picture, again, that vision of picturing what it looks like, and then and only then do we think about delivering a solution. So I'd encourage you, if you've not honed your skills around performance consulting, it's an absolutely brilliant way of approaching, and learning needs analysis is fraught with issues. We've all done this for many years, so I'd encourage you, think about performance consulting. Now, I want you to think, in your context, where would you go for insights or data around performance improvement? So not learning needs analysis, where would you go and look potentially for insights which might help you diagnose what actually we need to be focusing on and how we approach that? So let me give you an example. I'm sitting currently on a board of one charity, one international development charity, and for me, I go and read the annual report regularly in terms of what the priorities are for the board and for the senior leaders to understand what are we trying to drive forward here. So annual reports, maybe someone could put that in the word cloud for me. But annual reports are somewhere. In my consulting approach, often, if I don't know an organisation, I spend plenty of time on their website, I look at their annual accounts, I look at their annual reports if they're producing them, because those are brilliant insights which help me to diagnose where performance might need to be supported. So let's have a look at some of the things again, and I'd encourage you, if you've got your smartphone there, you may want to take a picture of this, because there's some things in here which you can probably work on. So we're looking at quarterly performance reviews. So yeah, performance reviews, and we mentioned in the first session that we need to be a bit careful about them because they can be subjective and they can be over time. But without doubt, performance information back from line managers for me is really, really crucial. So we've got a number of things using software analysis here, ChatGPT. Yeah, it's an interesting one in terms of using AI to analyze in a particular role the kind of things that we might be looking at. Now, obviously, that's often more of a global data set. So what else have we got here as well? We've got employee engagement. Excellent. If we're thinking about how do we drive motivation within the organisation, look at engagement figures might be really important. What I've found is often the engagement figures will give you an insight into which particular teams really need some support or some encouragement. So again, we can look at engagement because it really helps us around this. Support groups is another great one. So maybe we want to look around what customer support is being required, because it might give us insights into particular things where we can draw alongside, for instance, a customer services team to help them support particular issues or particular things as well. Let's see what else we've got. Keep building, guys. Keep coming with your answers. This moves so quickly. It's really encouraging, actually, but it's really interesting to see what else we've got on here. So shop floor genius. Okay, doesn't mean if you don't work in retail or manufacturing, you might not understand what shop floor means in your context. But there's that whole thing about walking around the business. And I think sometimes I look back on my learning career, too often I got stuck in a learning ghetto. I was in my own environment. So often walking the floor just helps us to understand what is actually going on in the business. So it's really important. And you might have seen those TV programs where senior executives go in disguise and they head it back into the organization and they go serve on a takeaway or whatever, and they are sometimes absolutely shocked or appalled at some of the things that have actually crept into the business environment, and it gives them such clear ways to do business improvement. So again, I'd encourage you as a learning professional, as an organizational development or HR professional, it is really worthwhile just getting out there and walking the floor and seeing what's going on. So I encourage you, just take a screenshot, because there's probably some things there on the feedback we've got there which you can take and implement in your own situation. If you want to move on Josh Arrett's diagram, if you want to move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, and if you want to go up to value creation, here's a few things which I suggest you might want to do, is really understand the organizational KPIs. This concept of friction in customer service, we often look, where is the friction or the sticking point in the customer journey? Well, maybe we should be looking for where friction is in the day-to-day roles of individual staff. Again, data-driven decisions, and I really love co-creation and collaboration. So part of what we need to do is to be out there as true business partners, walking the floor, understanding how we can co-create brilliant performance solutions with staff. Okay, third shift, we're going to think about established to emerging technologies. And in some ways I place myself, I'm not an AI expert, and there are people even in the building here who are way beyond where I would be. I want to say that with humility. And yet I know that artificial intelligence is so crucial for where we need to be heading. And if we think about established technologies, many of us have been involved with LMSs or LXPs or content creation, but there are so many opportunities for us to think about how we can embrace emerging technologies. So in this little segment for a few minutes, what I want to do is to get us to think about emerging technologies from a learner perspective. Now, sadly, often if we say digital solutions, digital learning to our staff or to our learners, their impression is, God, this is so dry and so boring, because they've been fed compliance solutions. And I'm not knocking compliance, it's a really key area. I think we can design it a lot better. But often people have just been used to this kind of content being pushed through to you, and then you do your 8 out of 10 test, and if you don't pass your test, your manager comes and gives you some real stick around it. That's the concept when we say digital learning that many people have got. So we need to reframe learning in terms of emerging technologies. Now, recently I went to Gaudi's Cathedral, Sagrada Familia Cathedral in Barcelona. And you know, I was absolutely struck by the user experience walking into that building. It was packed. From the moment I actually hung my coat up in the cloakrooms, I was encouraged to get my smartphone out, and I was encouraged to engage with all sorts of different things. So you can see on the slides here, there was audio which you could tap into, there were headsets, multiple language translations, there were videos playing. Also, next slide, you can see they even had augmented reality. So when we looked up at the ceiling, I could hold my own smartphone, not some ropey bit of technology, but my own smart device. I could put up and I could understand how the ceiling was constructed. Audio visual, great design around icons. So I guess what I wanted to stress to us is that our learners now, our customers, are expectant to have great technology because it's occurring in their everyday life. And just looking at maybe LMSs, content libraries, and compliance learning is not going to cut the mustard anymore. So just want to think a little bit around, if you're phobic of rats, just shut your eyes for a moment, but this is on here for a reason. Often the philosophy underpinning our approach to learning technologies is very much around a behaviorist model, going back to dear old Skinner. I learned as a school teacher many, many years ago about conditioning, where we expect people to consume some content, and if they get it right, then we're really pleased. If they get it wrong, there's maybe some kind of punishment around it that's being strong. But hey, some of us have failed our 8 out of 10 tests around GDPR. But that was the kind of the old model underpinning learning technologies. But what we're now seeing is it's more of a constructivist approach, where we're allowing learners to engage with us and construct their own environments. So I'd encourage you, if you're not strong on learning philosophies, don't be put off by the word philosophy. Go and have a look at what it is to shift from perhaps a more behaviorist model of technologies to a more constructivist model. And some of the technologies which we're now seeing come in, which are available in general life, are things like virtual reality and augmented reality. So VR is just brilliant for creating simulations where people can go in and mess up and have a go and not be afraid of making a mistake. Safe to fail environments. So again, we can now look at leveraging technologies, these emerging technologies. AR, if we think about augmented reality, if I think around now watching sport on TV, I'm a bit of a fan of Formula One racing. The augmented reality in terms of what they overlay on the car so that I can understand as someone not technically proficient with Formula One technology, I can see what's going on. And again, augmented reality very easily allows us to overlay in the workplace performance support guides and checklists, or maybe how to do a particular thing. So I'd encourage you to think around even small steps. If you've not harnessed, for instance, augmented reality, it's a real option for us. Now, again, I just want to touch on artificial intelligence. There are many ways in which artificial intelligence will actually support us in terms of what we're trying to achieve here in new technologies. So artificial intelligence will transform and is transforming across the whole learning, design and delivery cycle. So it's worth thinking about things like maybe how are we generating content? I mean, many of us will be using AI for content generation, but maybe we need to think about now a more systematic way of doing that. Maybe translation, if you're working across multiple languages. I'm working with one client at the moment, and we're just looking at how can we take content and make it contextual for so many different learners. If you want to think about nudge theory and how we support people to get a nudge in the moment to encourage them to do a bit of learning for their performance, again, AI will allow us to do that, automated assessments. Even things like design assistance. If designing now, we can use AI to support us. So I'm just going to encourage you, we're going to go on to the next Mentimeter poll. Now, this is going to take a little bit of clicking for you, but my guess is you've had a coffee during the coffee break, so you should be ready to do some action here right now. Just out of interest, of the 10, these are not the only ways that we can harness maybe AI and emerging technology, but of the ones which we've put here, let's have a look. Which ones are you actually now using or planning to use? So this is anonymous, so you don't have to pretend that maybe you're doing more than you are. Certainly that's where I would be. There's certain things on here. For instance, if I look at automated assessments, I've got my head around that one, but I'm not doing it. But we're just encouraging, let's have a look at the ones which we're actually using in terms of embracing emerging technology. So let's have a look again at what's coming through here. So needs analysis, great. Okay, so we've got lots of people are now beginning to use AI around needs analysis, which is a much quicker, much more efficient way of doing that. Doesn't surprise me on content generation. Many of us are using that, and certainly for myself, it's something I'm trying to do. I'm making sure I'm leveraging my own human writing skills alongside some of the content generation. But without doubt, this is speeding us as we move into 2025. Automated assessments, that's interesting. Quite a few of that's surprising for me, but that's really encouraging. So again, we can now use AI to provide assessments, but also to analyse those assessments. Gone are the days when I go back to my teaching career, my university career, where assessments were all manually done. We can now use assessments to do that. We're seeing more coming through on design guidance. A bit more on translation has nipped up as well. So I want to encourage you, as we just finished this particular section, many of us have got very comfortable with established technology, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not decrying the application of learning management systems and learning experience platforms, but there is so much more that we can do in terms of leveraging emerging technologies, not only for our own workflows, but also for those of our learners as well. My goodness, there's a breadth of difference between those two design styles, but hey, but with IKEA now, IKEA is providing us as customers with augmented reality to place furniture in our own homes. So again, in terms of thinking about your own approach to this, be aware that learners now are already using these technologies, and we need to think about how we can leverage those. So the last trend, just as we head towards the end of this session, we're going to look at the move from generic to personalization. Gone are the days where allegedly Henry Ford said you can have any car providing it's black. The picture of the cupcakes, I think, is much more where our world is today, that we expect personalisation. This is something as customers which is not an added extra for us now. This is at the heart of the proposition. And again, just going to the local coffee shop, I'm a tea drinker, but if you go to the local coffee shop, you can be astounded. I grew up as a child in the 70s when your choice of coffee was either black or white, and you had some milk in it. That was what it was. But if we now look, when you move into the coffee shop arena, it's absolutely empowered with personalisation. And I stand next to people who say, I want extra hot. I don't know how you make boiling water even more hot than boiling water, but hey, that's an option for you. So we are very used to choice, and yet in learning design, often it's been very much a one-size-fits-all. We've had very much kind of, it's the stormtrooper approach, isn't it? Everybody has the same deal, the same outfit, the same provision or whatever. And generic programs, whilst we may need some of those in terms of some of our compliance and maybe some of our process delivery, we really need to think about how we can develop programs to be more interactive and more customised and personalised. And I want to call out Nick Shackleton-Jones here, who's done some great work around thinking around how do we build motivation naturally into learning. And it is about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Now, if I look back over my learning career, often the things I've been involved with have been applied to the organisation. Intrinsic motivation is much more tapping in to that kind of coffee agenda where we understand what personally is your choice, what's motivating you. And as we design more for intrinsic motivation, we'll see that our learners come alive. Often I think about my history in learning has been very much kind of push initiatives. We want you to do this program. We want you to do these induction modules. The compliance thing comes up again. Often one of the reasons we're struggling with engagement and learner motivation is because it is very push. And what we want to move is a pull model where people are engaging with learning because it's attractive to them and it's important to them. And that, in that sense, I just call out Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, which many of you will come across, but it's worth just noting it again in this session here, that self-determination in learning is such a powerful motivator. And it is about looking at competence, which matters for us. What things am I trying to develop? And give me some autonomy to be able to develop those things. And also, the theory says as well that relatedness is really important. So yeah, my latest book is looking at learning communities. I believe collaboration now is how many people want to do this. They don't want to be a singleton on a digital course. They want to be connecting with other people. And self-directed learning really does drive performance through 4 key ways for me. It allows us to flex learning to create best experience for given learners in different contexts. It also recognises what I might already know, and that's one of the real frustrations with compliance learning. I might know all this stuff, but hey, I've got to go through it all again. It also contextualises and understands the circumstances that I'm actually working in. So for me, when I was head of HR and learning in the drugs rehab organisation, we had people working in secure prison environments. That, I can tell you, is a very different environment to deliver learning as opposed to going into an office block. No digital devices were allowed into the prison for obvious reasons. So sometimes I literally turned up with a roll of wallpaper. That was what contextualisation in a prison setting meant in terms of the technology that I was allowed. So contextualisation allows us to think about design really in terms of what do people need. And tailoring and adjustments and options is really important as well. Now, artificial intelligence will help us massively around this, and we know that, for instance, adaptive learning paths are a really powerful way in which we can take almost standardized content, but we can allow people to take easily branched routes or for programs to adapt to particular needs as well. Real-time feedback is another great one in terms of personalization, that we can now inform people, we can now allow them to have that nudge in the moment. Chatbot coaching. Automated chatbots can provide brilliant performance support in some particular settings. And again, matching learners to experts. In organizations, if we're thinking about mentoring, again, AI is incredibly powerful at helping us to understand who has the need. And if we go back to our skills model from the first point of the keynote, we can actually begin to match people to mentors who have those skills. So again, in our exploration of AI, and many of us are on that journey right now, we need to recognize that this will be at the heart of our personalization agenda. It's Gerald Grove's stage self-directed learning model. And what Gerald Grove said, and this is going back to the 1990s, so this isn't new, but it just, for me, This is so inherent on if we're looking at personalised learning, about thinking about this. Often in organisations, we've built dependent learners, people who are dependent on the organisation. And one way you can tell this is if you go into an organisation and you say to someone, have you done any learning this year? And often they say, no, I've not done anything at all. So often the very nature, the way we've designed learning as learning professionals has created some dependency on the organisation. Now what Grow says is we can move to the point where we're creating interested learners, where they're beginning to take some interest in their own development path. And this might be, again, back to Prochaska and Di Clemente, it might be about an awareness, a contemplation, a reflection on some of the things they need to get sharper on. And at that stage, we can begin to get alongside them with options for them to be more interested in shaping their learning plan. Grow then says in the third stage, and if you look at the model online, you can find it, there's lots of tactics. Again, I've got the tactics in driving performance through learning. But you then get to a point where you have involved learners, where we are beginning to co-create and collaborate in learning solutions and performance solutions, which is so exciting because there's skin in the game. The learners then are passionate about what they're doing because they have some involvement in shaping that. And eventually then, Grow says, you get to the point where we have self-directed learners, where it doesn't mean as learning professionals we stand back and we have no relevance anymore, but what we then have is a resourcing requirement, a resourcing responsibility to actually support people to develop. So I want to just stress, in the move towards personalisation, we may have actually got some groundwork to do as learning professionals about helping and equipping our learners to be better learners. Certain, when I was at university studying for my education degree, we looked at the concept of metacognition, which means thinking about how I think. So maybe we need to help our learners to learn about how to learn. It's a very powerful thing. So just as we begin to round up, I'm going to ask you, and this is anonymous, if the learners in your context, so if you work in an organisation, think about that. If you may be a consultant, maybe think about one of your key organisations. Be honest, where do you think learners currently are? Are they dependent, relying on the organisation to shape their learning? Are they interested? They're beginning to take a bit of accountability. Are they involved? Have they become active participants? Or are they now really truly self-directed and personalised and taking a proactive responsibility to drive their own learning paths? So vote away there. As I said, there's no shame in where you're at on this one. Certainly for me, if I look back at my career, I would have been down the bottom left-hand corner of Jos Surrett's diagram, and I would have been, yeah, I think I'd have had many dependent learners. But now I'm passionate, for instance, with the new book around learning collaboration, about now proactively enabling people to drive their own learning. Just have a look at the poll and where we've come to. So we've got mainly dependent, reliant on being directed. Now, I don't want you to be negative about this. I want you to be encouraged that wherever you are, go and have a look at Gerald Grow's model, because there are nudges that you can do to move your learners more towards self-direction. But I'm not sure we've got anybody who's saying we're at that self-directed point. So I guess just in closing, just to say, look at now moving people more towards that self-directed model. If I ask you, what really do you remember about learning, I'm almost guaranteed that it has some sort of personalisation. And for me, I was allowed to do a project of my choice, and I looked at the Kon-Tiki expedition where Thor Heyerdahl went across the Pacific on a raft to prove they could do it. And my teacher worked with me to look at the geography. We made a craft model of the boat. We looked at the map of where he'd been. We wrote some diary things. So please, just don't underestimate, as you empower your learners, the impact that will have. So that's been a fairly sharp 45 minutes, but I trust this has gathered some of the key themes, not the only ones, 4 vital themes that we need to think through. Now, we began by saying that mindset is really important. It's not about doing. Often we've got to reflective practice to think about how we need to change. And we mentioned 4 key ones, shifts that we need to think, moving from role-based to skills-based development, from volume to value in terms of performance impact and performance consulting, thinking about established to emerging technologies, and moving from generic to personalization. So just in closing, and I'll pass back to Steve, I just want you to reflect during the rest of this afternoon or morning if you're in the US, and tomorrow. I want you to look at the what. What things are we sharing with you, the case studies, the examples, but then really importantly, I want you to ask the question, so what does this mean for me? How do I contextualize this in my particular circumstances? How can I really apply this? And then now what is the big question? What will you do next? So we're going to encourage you to put your questions in the chat and to give responses to us.